About to get into a spoiler-free movie review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I've never had to prepare myself this much to keep it together during a movie review, but that is what I'm going to do today because this movie tugged on every single one of my heartstrings. It hit me in the gut. It went places I did not think it was going to go. I was a little bit unwell after watching this movie. So again, I will keep all my thoughts spoiler free. Not even going to hit the trailer because I want to get right into this review. So what this movie is about, we have our heroes back, and we knew going into this movie it was going to be their final ride. The mission on this movie is pretty simple. The Guardians are trying to save their friend Rocket Raccoon from the High Evolutionary, and I was really not expecting this movie to be a full-on Rocket movie. The first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was very much Peter Quill and his relationship with his mother. The second movie was him and his relationship with his father, finding out that the guy he'd been seeking after really wasn't the guy he was expecting him to be. Instead, he had his real father figure, Yondu, with him the entire time. Part 3 is much a deep dive into our heroes, them getting to accept themselves and just trying to save their friend. The first two movies have the best opening sequences, not just in the MCU, but really in anything I've seen in the last 15 years. They really just always set the tone of being a lot of fun, but the difference in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it was a lot more subdued. You don't really get that at the beginning of this movie, and instead hits you with some high stakes knowing that Adam Warlock, the High Evolutionary, are all here and they all mean business. And we find our friend Rocket Raccoon in a bad spot from the very beginning of this movie. Another thing I've always loved about the Guardians of the Galaxy is we never had to go through all of their origin stories. Much like in Star Wars, which there are a lot of parallels in the Guardians and Star Wars, they just kind of existed in this world. We all just accepted what they were going through, where they had been, all of their characters, and just went along for the ride. And that's what made those movies great. That's what set them apart in the MCU. And throughout the entire Infinity Saga, they always felt a little bit isolated. And I like that they kept it that way. I think that was James Gunn's vision all along, to make his own version of Star Wars inside the MCU. And this served as the best final chapter possible. This movie transcends the superhero genre. I always feel like, as a person who has trouble battling their own emotions and expressing them sometimes, I always try to find movies that make me sad. I feel like that is something I try really hard to find, of something that's going to make me a little bit weepy, make me kind of be in tune with my emotions, and I just haven't really found that yet. Now I have it. It is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I love how it maintained this somber tone throughout the entire movie. And you feel this throughout the entire movie a lot with Peter Quill as he is trying to save his best friend, but also dealing with the fact that the Gamora he knows and fell in love with is no longer there. And at times, their relationship in this movie is very awkward on that account of him just trying to face the reality that she is no longer there. But I love that this movie shifted away from Peter Quill's story and all the other Guardians to really focus in on Rocket, who now I feel has subtly become one of the best characters in the MCU. This movie served as his origin story, and it is almost that of a supervillain. I still can't put my head around the fact that all these things that he went through, and he still wanted to go on and do something good and become a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. We never really got that in Volume 1 and Volume 2. The funny thing about this movie is that even if you haven't seen 1 or 2, you can dive right into this movie. They reset everything pretty quickly. I feel like all the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are pretty self-contained because they are all kind of deep dives into one specific element of all of our characters. And I feel like this movie shows you the true meaning of that, of them learning what it means to be a guardian of the galaxy, a protector of those who cannot protect themselves. And with them learning that, it takes you through every emotional level possible. And I've never felt so sad for a raccoon, for other little animals. So I would say, if you haven't seen this movie yet and you are an animal lover, it is probably going to hit you into some feels. There's one line specifically that I don't want to ruin because I want it to give you the same weight that it gave me when I saw it. It just hit me in the gut, and I'm still thinking about that line over and over again because it sparked an emotion in me that I was just surprised I was going to be this invested in a character I did not think was this complex. James Gunn Prove me wrong. And as a director, he nailed everything down to the last minute detail, even back to the intro, how everything from the text was very orchestrated, the way the fonts lined up and all the characters walked out and the logo came up behind them. Everything was just beautifully done in this movie, from the cosmic color palette to how the soundtrack and the score blend together so well in between all the action, where you have this fight sequence, it hits, and then this song perfectly hits to mix in that scene into the next scene. Watching this movie is the same thing as listening to the perfect song. How did somebody put all these elements that I know and love into one little piece of art that just hits on every single level possible? And this movie has 10 times more creativity and imagination than anything in the MCU right now. Everything down to the music, which I've been talking about, but the makeup in this movie, the costume design, they deserve an Oscar nomination right now for that. It looks magnificent. Better than any sci-fi movie that really comes to mind. And you're going to say it doesn't look better than Star Wars. This movie looks better than Star Wars to me. I know we hold that original trilogy to such a high level, but when are we going to advance from that and say that there have been sci-fi movies created that are better than Star Wars? I'm going to say it. I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, 2, and 3 more than the original Star Wars trilogy. I didn't grow up with them. I discovered them later as an adult. So if that takes away all my credibility as a film reviewer and enthusiast, so be it. But I have not felt the emotions that I felt in this movie in anything Star Wars related ever. So I know we hold that to some gold standard, like nothing can touch Star Wars. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is better than anything I've ever experienced when it comes to Star Wars. I can know and appreciate those for what they did. And of course, this wouldn't exist if Star Wars was never created. A lot of the elements in this movie are odes to Star Wars. Even the whole creation of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the MCU is a node to Star Wars, so I understand that. But what James Gunn has done with these characters and their evolution and making you care so much about not only the main characters, but the side characters, even characters that seem like background insignificant characters in this, you care about everything in this movie. The villains may not be as iconic as other Star Wars villains, and it may not create as big of a world that can expand like Star Wars, but this movie is just so much more satisfying to me, and I'm going to remember this one more than anything Star Wars. And yeah, you may call me a Marvel stan, and part of it was that it felt like the last little thread to the Infinity Saga with some of the references to Thanos. It kind of felt, yes, like that last little piece of my young adult life having its final chapter here. So if I'm ranking it as one of the best sci-fi trilogies of all time, without a doubt, it is the best trilogy in the MCU. Nothing comes close. Not Captain America, not Iron Man. There are 4 Thor movies, so that kicks that one out. There are 4 Avengers movies, so that kicks that one out of the conversation. There are 3 in the Spider-Man trilogy right now with Tom Holland, but I am expecting that 4th one. So this is what I feel is the only true trilogy in the MCU. All the other ones had these other little building blocks that were building towards the Avengers movies and having all these other stories interconnected. But if you just sat down and watched these movies, it would feel like one big cohesive story that moves from one to the next seamlessly. There are so many more things I want to share with you about this movie, but I want to keep this spoiler free for those who haven't had the chance to see it yet. So there will be a spoiler review up on the feed, which is something I do whenever such a big movie comes out, and there are all these details I want to dive into, but I don't want to ruin it for you. So a spoiler edition of the Guardians review will be coming soon, and we'll get into more. But there is nothing bad I can say about this movie. It made me feel, it made me laugh, it made me excited, it made me cheer. And this movie takes you so very, very low. It gets dark, it gets sad, it gets to a point where you think, man, I thought Marvel movies are supposed to be a fun time. There were no rules in this movie. It was James Gunn going all out, giving us his all, saying, this is it for me in the MCU. I'm going over to DC and working on Superman now. But in doing that, he gave us one of the best movies in the MCU of all time. And I think it is James Gunn's best work. And a lot of it comes down to his attention to detail, I think people take a lot of enjoyment in the music he picks and how selective he is and how he goes after songs that are really hard to get to put him in this movie. I think my favorite use was probably No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys. This just proves why he is the best at what he does, and also proves why Chris Pratt was really the best choice here as Star-Lord. And I know he gets a lot of crap too for being and everything, for not being that great of an actor. He gave a performance of his lifetime. Zoe Saldana as Gamora not only shows you the range of her as an actor, but also how she can evolve one character and give them all these different looks. What more can I say about Dave Bautista that I haven't said already, and how I'm becoming a big stan of his? And I would say I feel like Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon doesn't really get that much credit for what he does with this role, but I was specifically just listening to the range of different emotions we heard from Rocket Raccoon in this movie. And I know we don't give out Oscars and awards for voice work, but we need to do that. Bradley Cooper deserves some kind of award for what he has done with Rocket Raccoon. And I understand if they did create an Oscar for voice acting, the MCU would already be out of the conversation because they never get nominated for anything cool. It put me on the verge of tears. I was very close to crying. I didn't quite get there because I think at the moment it got the most emotional. I was also aware of my surroundings, so I was like, I'm probably not going to cry right now, but I was really close. If my heart wasn't made of stone, I easily would have cried in this movie. So for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I rarely give out this rating, usually only once, maybe twice a year. My highest rated movie of the year so far, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, 5 out of 5 Zunes.